Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Truding in So Percussion, and this is the Brooklyn Bound podcast. We've been having a lot of fun talking with folks who are doing sets on our October 8th show. And today I get to talk with new friend and awesome singer, Stephanie Lamprea. How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me here.
I was just telling you that I talked to Nina Dante yesterday, and you two are two of the awesome musicians that I've met on Zoom that feel like when we meet in real life, it'll just get cooler. But I'm
Yeah.
excited to make friends on Zoom. It's been awesome to get to know your work a little bit, and I'm totally pumped to talk to you today. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you.
You're in Boston, right? Is that what what you were
Yeah,
saying?
that's correct. Yeah, I moved to Boston a couple of years ago, and in the before times before this pandemic, I was
Right.
driving back and forth quite a bit for work, and I have a room in New York I can stay in, so it feels like I'm sort of half half the time here in Boston, half the time in New York. But now with the pandemic, I'm in Boston.
Yeah, I like the before times. Like, I think there's going to be I don't know what it is. BP, BC, before COVID, before pandemic, before
Yeah.
BQ. Maybe I like BQ. Before quarantine. Yeah, wildness. Um, well, like I said, I have these 5 questions I've been asking to everybody, but they always, the conversations just seem to go fun places. So the first one is just the biggest, most sprawling question, which is, tell us your story of how you discovered a love for music and how you are doing what you're doing now.
Sure. So I grew up learning classical music. I was a bad cellist for a while. Um, my older sister, Christine, she's a professional cellist, and she plays a lot of standard classical music, and she's incredible. But anyway, she went to Juilliard, and I thought growing up I was like, oh, that's a thing you can do. Like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
And I went to Manhattan School of Music for an opera degree, and I graduated, and I didn't quite feel connected to opera, and I wasn't sure why, because I always loved to sing and I didn't know. And during college, I had collaborated with a lot of student composers who asked me to perform their works for classes and gigs, because I have perfect pitch. And so composers was like, ooh, read this atonal thing. I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, okay. And, and so I had an emotional connection there with my singing, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. So after college, I did not get my master's. I just got an admin job and sort of putzed around for a while. And then a few years in, some friends had encouraged me to start curating my own concerts of new music works that I wanted to do. So I just started, putting on concerts in New York. I sang at Spectrum a lot. I love Spectrum, and
Cool.
I just started to get more connected with the new music community there, and found my niche. And yeah, here we
That's
are.
awesome. I love. I want to go back and follow up on earlier, Stephanie. But I love just the mentioning of the. There's such a community aspect to saying, like, I sang at Spectrum a lot. Like that says a certain thing about what community and how cool that community is and how free. And Spectrum has it moved around at all, or has it always been
It was in Manhattan for a bit, and then
the
it
Lower
moved to
East Side? Is
Brooklyn.
what I remember. Right?
Yeah, it was in Brooklyn, and that's when I had started singing there. I think they closed for the pandemic. I'm not sure what's going on right now,
Yeah.
but Spectrum was always a place where if I wanted to try new things, I could perform there. And the curator there, Glenn, he was just
Yeah.
so kind and so open-minded, and so I felt I really discovered myself there. I performed Apergis' 14 recitations in full for the first time there,
There.
and
Awesome.
yeah, it was just a very comfortable and exciting place.
Well, I feel like in some broad way, what Brooklyn Bound is trying to be is that kind of space where I know those spaces exist in lots of spots in New York. The ones that so grew up kind of playing in um, the Stone, or even what the Knitting Factory used to be, or a club called Tonic. Like those spots have changed and aren't quite the same anymore. So it feels I love the idea that. Brooklyn Bound can be a place for folks to try out new things, kind of like
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I want to go back before we get to Brooklyn Bound. So where you were growing up, you were really pumped to listen to your older sister playing cello. Where were you were you in New York, or were you?
We grew up in San Antonio, Texas,
Nice.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it was very different from New York. Although we were born in New York, we moved to Texas when I
Okay.
was 6. And then both Christine and I moved back to New York for school, and then my parents ended up moving back. So now we're all here.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. I was born in Texas too, actually. I was born in not two. I was born in Texas and left when I was around four. I have the opposite story.
Oh,
Um,
what city?
in Houston, which
Oh,
I've learned to, gone back and played concerts there and discovered more of the food scene and the art scene and stuff. And it's been fun to go. I've actually only been to San Antonio once, and I also really enjoyed it there too. Just mostly food. I know, like I know mostly Texas in terms of food spots,
yeah.
which is cool, which is very cool. So then you moved to New York, and it's funny. We were talking, this is the second time I'm mentioning talking to Nina yesterday, but it's so interesting. Like, I feel like a percussionist story that comes up a lot is like, oh, maybe I started to play drum set, and this is my story. Maybe I started to play drum set and I got excited about classical music and moved into the kind of experimental contemporary thing. Like
Mhm.
Nina said the same thing yesterday about getting excited about classical music, studying opera, and then kind of discovering that you wanted to go a different direction. Is that, it's just cool to hear that is that a variation that you hear a lot from singers? Like,
Yeah,
and so what
absolutely.
was it about that move from opera to a different type of singing that felt really exciting to you?
Well, I guess I want to answer that with the sort of negative spin in a way. I think that in conservatory level training for singing, there's this sort of colonization of the voice where, you know, standard operatic Western European classical singing is touted as the healthy way to sing. And so if your voice is sort of like built exactly for that, and your repertoire love is like for that, then like you're fine. But if you're anywhere outside of that spectrum, whether you like to sing Baroque music or jazz or contemporary anything, it's a little bit strange to be in a conservatory and to be studying opera, but not being encouraged to like really find like your natural voice in a way. Um, which is silly because there's so many different traditions of singing outside of 18th 19th century Western music that's totally healthy and totally valid. Um, and so I think a lot of singers go through this having to sort of rediscover themselves and sort of like come out to their natural voice.
Mm.
Maybe for some people it's probably a negative experience, for some maybe it's a positive one, but I've had a lot of conversations with singers about that. And there's for a lot of singers kind of have to like make a decision, sort of like break away from like the mother that is opera and then go and be your cool individual self, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, it does. Yeah, I feel like I think about it so much in terms of like, for me and some of my artistic practices, I feel like I'm trying to get back to where like you start in this natural place where you have a natural voice, though it's uncrafted and raw, and maybe you can't exactly say what you want to say. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like I trace it for myself as a composer for sure, because I've been more cognizant becoming a composer later in my life. Like, when you're solidly in puberty and it's awkward getting away from your natural and trying to get all the way around to like that natural space again.
Hmm.
um I feel like this is coming up in a great way too, because I was talking to a composer, Elijah Smith, who's on the same Brooklyn Bound, and he's a vocalist, and he told a story about auditioning for like arts high school and singing like Stevie Wonder and Bill Withers and these songs that felt really natural to him. And then he got in and he was really excited, and then he was like starting to study opera, and he's like, wait a minute, that's not why I don't do that, I can't do that, and like this kind of like take it for granted that that's what studying singing is, or studying classical singing is.
Hmm.
When you said colonization of the voice, that's like a really heavy thing to think about.
Hmm.
As a percussionist, we've been thinking about that a lot, about the objects that we hit and where they come from. But is that something is that a term that you've said before? Is that something you've thought about,
it's
colonization of the voice?
it's it's not something like, it's not an original thought of my own. I had a really wonderful conversation with vocalist Amitha Kadambi, who's incredible. You should check out her work. And she talks and teaches a lot about timbral techniques within vocal performance, and different music theories, and she's someone who could speak much more to that. But we had a conversation about, and she used colonization of the voice, and that really resonated with me a lot, and sort of encouraged me further to sort of like take my technique and my creativity and really take them as my own thing. It reminded me of there's one time I was having a lesson with a colleague of mine a few years ago, and she just said simply, like, you can do whatever you want with your technique. Like, you don't have to like sing Mozart. You can do whatever you want with it. It's still healthy. And it was not the first time someone had told me that, but it was a moment that like clicked for me and really allowed me to just like separate myself from like tradition and just take tools given from conservatory, from private teachers, and just like find the kinds of music I wanted to sing. And it was really incredible.
That's awesome. I love those. I love following those moments of sparks like that feels like a moment of spark for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do want to get to what you're singing on Brooklyn Bound, but before we get there, as the next question, like I think what the pieces you're going to sing on Brooklyn Bound to me seem pretty in some ways very representative of what you do. But you don't only sing solo repertoire. You sing, if I remember right, some of the videos that we were, that you're passing back and forth, were ensemble pieces. Tell us about what your musical life is in a broader sense before we get to your solo set.
Yeah. So I guess in categories, I do sing a lot of solo rep. I sing a lot of contemporary chamber repertoire, just like, composed pieces written by composers today, sort of in the classical genre. I also sing some more like avant-garde experimental music, which could be with other instruments or by myself too, but often with instruments, and that could take on some improvisation or free improvisation or structured improvisation, depending. And then I also do some interdisciplinary performance, whether that's dancing, like this Abergese dance project I'm doing, or providing recordings for sculptures and machines. Like one time I was hired to sing some improvised vocal leases for this sort of like machine with like a nose and mouth or something, and it's on display in like some museum in Paris
Awesome.
somewhere.
Love that.
I don't know. It was really strange because I kept having to improvise and use different timbres and like more nasal, more dark, because then there's an electronic musician manipulating the voice to lower or increase the pitch depending. It was really bizarre. It was pretty
Wild. Cool. That sounds amazing. I want to see that. Well, so being like kind of halfway in New York and halfway in Boston and mentioning spectrum, like when you do projects with other musicians, does it feel like is there a specific community that you find yourself oftentimes playing pieces with the same kind of instrumentalist, or is it a kind of how does your musical life work with the folks you play with?
It depends on the discipline. I find that like with, let's say contemporary chamber music, I work with a similar community for that. And then with improvisation, there's sort of like another community that I work with. Within those communities, there might be some collaborators that I work more often with. Like for example, in Boston, I have a contemporary vocal duo called Peridot, and the other singer is Rose Hegley, and so she and I work together very often. Awesome. And then there's like if I think of like improvisation, I've been working lately with percussionist Adam Vidixis. I should have practiced that.
It sounded good to me.
Oh God, he's gonna kill me. It's gonna be like, what?
Oh no. Love it.
But he and I connected recently when I did a residency at Temple University, and we've improvised together over Zoom and in person since.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I would love to see that side of what you do sometimes. Yeah. Improv. I have that in my background as well, and Boston has a nice scene for that. Right. I mean the contemporary improv thing that comes out of NEC.
Yeah. That degree program at NEC brings out a lot of really, really cool musicians. What I also like about the, I guess the contemporary classical music scene in Boston in general is that it's very well supported by the community. It's very well supported by the universities. There's a lot of there's like funding for guest artists and students to put on performances. There seems to be a little bit of like a blur between like, you know, master's students, doing contemporary music and young non-school people in the 20s and 30s. Like there's a lot more of a collaboration spirit in
Yeah,
Boston that I like a lot.
that feels exciting. It's very cool. So specifically with what folks are going to hear on your set at Brooklyn Bound, you mentioned the Apergis dance project. Tell us about that, and tell us about the other piece you're going to sing as well.
Yeah, so the Apergis 14 Recitations is a 40-minute work for solo voice. It's divided into 14 movements, and it's just a lot of crazy atonal works with different timbral techniques. And a couple of years ago, I received a grant from the Puffin Foundation to put on an interdisciplinary performance of this work. So I collaborated with a dancer, Layla Franklin, and we choreographed and did the whole thing. And I wanted to have like a sort of social justice kind of topic, so I decided to base it around domestic abuse, because I thought particularly with this piece doesn't really have any like explicit words or sentences being sung. It's not really that translatable, except for maybe a couple of moments that are very, very important. But I thought like the experience of performing this piece, I felt like, oh, there's so much in my heart that I want to express, but I'm unable to for X, Y reasons. And so I thought a lot about like, you know, the isolation and torment that victims may have in this terrible situations. And I thought if I can branch out further and add this movement component to that, may also further express what's going on. It felt really incredible to perform, and
Yeah,
we donated some proceeds to a women's shelter in Boston. So anyway,
that's
so
awesome, Stephanie. Wow, that's really,
yeah,
really cool. Like I know, I mostly know Apergis' percussion works, which also have a lot of text, like spoken kind of text that you're making sounds along with the spoken text, and for the most part, it's just sounds, it's not sentences, just like you said, or it's fragments of sentences repeated so many times it just kind of becomes sounds.
yeah.
It feels like there's a similarity between maybe that the way he writes for spoken word percussion and the way these songs are set, or these pieces are set.
Absolutely, that was like one of his like big things, and taking like theater and music and sort of like turning them on their head and being like, you know, what is communication really on the stage, what is drama, you know. And he really obscured that in the way to find like alternate ways of communicating. I think it was very like a very poignant mission and very effective mission of
Mm.
his.
And on Brooklyn Bound, you're doing 3 of the 14 songs, is that right?
We're doing one movement of it, but it has sort of 3 sections to it. But it's movement 8, and it's one of the triangle scores, meaning you see like music that literally looks like a triangle, and it's like my, semi, si, semi, and like notes are gradually added to each triangle. And so we've choreographed each triangle. It's a little insane.
Awesome. For you, choreographed for you.
Yeah, well, in this case, well, Anne and I are doing the piece a couple of times in October. So there's a version of just me doing my own thing. There's a version where Anne has her own dance to it, where sometimes we're in sync and sometimes she dances canonically to me. Sometimes she improvises. It's so
Amazing.
She's brilliant.
Oh well, I'm very excited to see both versions of that. I want to see the solo and duo versions of that. It's so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Um, I do want to follow up on something you just said there, but it'd be cool to hear about this other piece before we move on. You're doing another piece on the Brooklyn Bound set as well.
Yeah. I'm singing a piece by Rebecca Saunders. This piece was written in 2017, and it's called O, for solo soprano, and it's based on the "Yes, I Will Say Yes, I Will Yes" monologue from James Joyce's Ulysses, and that this text has been set a lot by a lot of different composers. But the piece is really gorgeous. There's a lot of different timbres used, different extended techniques used, and like very like gossamer ways.
Mm.
And I think it's a really wonderful sensual setting of this text. So
So
this
cool.
is a new piece for me, and I'm really really excited to present this.
That's so cool. Is this the first time you'll have sung this piece?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yay! Yay! Premiere performance of your it sounds like it was premiered earlier, but this is the first time you're taking it on, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. It was
Awesome.
premiered. I need to double check this, but I believe it was premiered by Sarah Maria's son, and then also performed by Juliet Fraser. Sarah Maria's son is a German soprano. Juliet Fraser is a British soprano, and Juliet's recording is on YouTube, and it's just like incredible.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I was just looking for a new rep one day, and I like came upon that, and I was like, I will order this music right now. Like, here we
Yeah, wow.
go.
That seems so cool. Um, I love the idea that it's set on that part of Ulysses. So's been doing a project with couple projects with Caroline Shaw, but one we've been writing some songs together, and one of the guys in the group, Adam, we always give him a hard time because he's been reading Ulysses. It's been a huge project, and there's no reason to give him a hard time about that. But it's just this huge book that he's carrying around in his backpack all the time, you know. And you get out this book,
Like,
it's just
nerd.
like, you know. But I mean, some of the texts are just so fun to play with. The way he plays with words, and then the way, you know. So some of the songs that we made with Caroline use some Joyce text as well, which is it. Yeah, sounds amazing. It sounds like a really neat pairing with Apergis.
Yeah, yeah, definitely like different perspectives on like how to communicate and how to use text. And they're both very different sound worlds for sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm really glad to pair them.
Well, you had mentioned when you were talking about the choreography and the bigger project with Apergis, you mentioned social justice and thinking about a kind of theme and a pairing. And just one thing I've been asking, you know, everybody is just, you know, the idea of having this conversation in this moment, and the idea of making music and being creative in this moment. This moment meaning 6 months into a pandemic when we're quarantined, and this moment also meaning 4 months. I should do better math. 4 months since George Floyd's murder kind of, you know, set off a
Mhm.
bigger conversation about Black Lives Matter, a conversation that had been around for a long time, but is maybe being had in my community more than it was, you know. So just you know, this really kind of heavy time. I think about it with my kids. I think I've said this before, where like so many things, you know, that my kids go through, I can say, oh, when I was in third grade, I went through this too, and blah, blah, blah. And now it just feels like this moment of like, nobody can talk about what it's like to go through this moment, you know? So it feels in that way like this real singular moment. And thinking about what it means to be an artist in this moment is, um, I don't know, for me is it's alternatingly really heavy and kind of reassuring, you know. Like what's been your thought process in this moment about your practice, and has it changed at all in this last 6 months, or has it been, you know, a kind of a respite that you've gone back to that has been, you know, that has remained similar, or how has it been for you?
Um, I think in the beginning it was a bit of a respite. You know, when everything shut down and we all lost our work, I wasn't quite sure what to do. But
Yeah.
a lot of I started this small project where a bunch of composers who I met online wrote me short 1 minute works, and I would just post videos on social media, and that occupied me for like months.
Mm.
And it kind of brought me back to this place, like back in college that I had mentioned when I worked with composers at school, and the the community of like composers and new music being sort of a safe haven and a place of discovery for me. And I felt sort of back in that safe haven, like in this pandemic, because otherwise there wasn't anything to do. But then suddenly I had this way of being creative in like short spurts, a little bit every day, and it really picked me back up.
Mm.
Um, and then now that things are slowly opening again, although I'm like knocking on wood. I mean, imagine like the winter and like a second wave. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, performing feels performing feels so much more important. Another thing that I'll steal from Amirtha is she mentioned to me, all work is political work. And I think that's really important to think about. I think a lot of um, action with, like this basically second civil rights movement we're in, um, is, people are like, a lot of people are in it right now because like it's in vogue, or it's like if you don't say something, then like you're a jerk or something. But my fear is that, like, once things get back to normal, that stuff's gonna be like forgotten again. And so I think about my practice and like being much more much more pressing and much more consistent with at least like my beliefs and all of that. And yeah, I think art needs to be like consistently like meaningful and consistently like challenging the community. um and I don't even mean like, like every piece has to be about Black Lives Matter, or every piece has to be about COVID. That's just like a surface thing that
Mhm.
doesn't really do it. But I mean, I think even performance art, even like if it doesn't have words or doesn't have like a very concrete thing, I think it's um extremely expressive and extremely meaningful, and can like produce action when done right. Um I don't know, that's
Yeah.
such a floof
No,
sentence. of that.
no, no, no. Sorry, I could have cut it in a comment at any moment, but it was just so nice to hear you speak about it. I mean, I think there is, when we were talking about the BQ AQ, like before quarantine,
Yeah.
after core BC AC. um there is this feeling, I feel like, of with COVID, there is this feeling of like, oh, I can't wait for things to get back to normal, because then we'll be able to play concerts again, or then, but just like you just articulated, with this social justice kind of second civil rights movement, or with this Black Lives Matter moment, the idea of getting back to normal is a terrible idea. Like that, going back to the way the conversations were in March would be would be terrible.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
idea that normal was good. Maybe normal was okay for my family, but normal is not okay uh, for the country.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like once, our eyes have been opened, and it's like you can't, like, if you actively shut them back out, that's a gross injustice
mm,
to everyone, and especially to those who have suffered, you know.
mm.
Yeah.
I love the quote that I guess you mentioned again from, was it Amirta? Is
Yeah,
that
Amirtha Kadambi. Yeah, yeah. She had
um
like texted, or she had like put that on like Facebook or something one day. Like
mm,
I had posted something, she's like, all work's political work. And I was just like,
yeah. No, I think that's awesome. I think so. There's like several years ago, we did a project. It took us a long time to do, but it was called a gun show, and it was, gun violence, and gun culture in the U.S. was on our minds a lot, and it took us a long time to do this show, and it felt like our kind of maybe most overtly political work. Um, and since then, it seems like in some ways the way it would be looked at, or the way we think about it, is that our shows became less political because they weren't topical in that way. But I think then we started to think about, like, actually a lot of the ways we were playing shows, and a lot of the ways we were playing with other people when we went to a new town, and just the act of getting together and sharing an experience, things that didn't feel political overtly, became really important in that way to us.
mhm.
Which I definitely have begun to 100% agree with, the idea that all work is political, because it all needs to be moving something forward, whether
Yeah.
it's overt or not. But I'm gonna start quoting Amirta with attribution.
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah. It's very, very cool. um well, I was just thinking, I think the reason we're having this conversation is a bit around quarantine, because the first thing I did during quarantine was catch up on a lot of listening, that when when I'm on tour, maybe I don't check out as much new music as I could, and you had sent so many awesome videos to check out. So that's a happy moment of quarantine, has been to just like discover many more cool folks. And this is not the end of this. Feels like a really great wrap up, doesn't it? I did this yesterday too. It feels like we should be moving on, but I have one last question for you. um I've been asking everyone too, just with this, I guess, with this COVID idea, um to just share some memory of a concert you had that was really meaningful. I've said at kind of each podcast, I think, that so kind of shares our stories of touring, when we're in a van together, and when we're like, I don't want to be driving after the show to the next town. The kind of like, life sucks. Oh, but do you remember when this crazy thing happened on stage, or this was really amazing? Like those stories have become really important. It's kind of like shared experience. So what, like, do you have I mean, it could be the most happy memory on stage, or the most transcendent memory on stage, or just the time where, your music blew off your music stand outside and you made up the rest of the aria, when you were in high
Oh
school,
God.
whatever that is.
That's like a nightmare scenario.
Totally, yeah.
um, Let me think. I think um, I think the most difficult piece I put together was I did a performance of Kate Soper's Ipse Dixit, which is like an hour and a half chamber work, and I worked with really wonderful colleagues in Boston. But we
That
had
piece is really awesome. I think that's one of the first video. I think that's maybe where part of our email conversation started. That piece is really cool, and I hadn't heard it until you sent it, I believe.
yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
so hard. It's so hard. Oh my God. And we didn't have, I mean, we had like just enough time to put it together. And I remember we had a dress rehearsal at the Community Music Center of Boston, where I teach, and they have like a recital hall there and some instruments. And we were so tired, and like we were running through like the first three movements and like had a break, and it was like okay, but like it was like not together. We had this break and we're like sitting like sweating. We're just like, I don't know if this is gonna
Yeah.
happen. Like, oh my God. And then like, we continued on with the rest of the rehearsal. And then we had the performance a couple days later or something. And the performance came together and it was amazing. But I remember like we were getting ready to walk like on stage. I mean, it was like in a big yoga studio, so there wasn't a stage. But I remember like my mom drove in and she was sitting in the back, and like we happened to be like waiting like kind of right by where she was to go on stage, and she looked at me and she's like, like good luck, baby, like good luck. And I was just like. I was like, save me, like mother, save
Get me
me.
out of here.
We had this moment, and I think she was like, are you okay? And then I like walked on stage, just like, oh God. And so I was like, we're about to begin, and at this moment, it was like, is this gonna happen?
Yeah.
And like I gave my like line, like, what is art? And then we started, it's like, okay, I know what we're doing. Like, we're gonna. I don't think I've sweated so much like in my
Yeah.
life, but it was incredible. And like the performing the piece, and it was like the first time, at least for me, like that we felt like really in the zone, and it was just like incredible. And like you could feel like the audience like being there with you, and like also there was a beer pairing for each movement, so maybe they're just really happy to be there.
Well done. And how many movements?
6 movements.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
good.
at the very end. Yeah.
And I love, so hasn't gotten, we haven't gone to the beer or wine pairing idea. Like the beer pairing with music feels so smart. I love it.
Mhm.
We haven't
Yeah,
done
no,
that.
super cool. From what I understood, the series that presented us is called Original Gravity Concert Series, and they do beer pairings with like a lot of their work. And so they had brought on 6 different breweries, and I don't know if they had sent the music to them or talked about the music or what, but then the brewers decided like, oh, I think this beer would pair because of this music thing or this. So it seemed
Yeah,
like very collaborative
I
and not
love
just
it.
like, here's a beer.
Totally. I think that's so cool. I'm really, yeah. All right. I haven't thought about that in a while, but that's a good thing. That's a good thought to leave me with. Of all the awesome things that have been said in this last 30 minutes, I'm going to also remember the beer pairing. Really good. Well, we are so psyched to have your work on Brooklyn Bound, and it's October 8th. It's 7 p.m. Eastern. I imagine, Stephanie, I hope you'll be around on YouTube in the chat comments.
Yeah,
With folks
will
watching.
do.
It's a I wasn't so sure how I was going to feel about these kind of virtual concerts, but the idea that everybody can kind of be on chat together and experience it together has actually been really lovely. So I'll see you on chat October 8th, if not before then.
Great.
Yeah, really nice to talk to you. Have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thanks so much.
See you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.